All right. Hi, everyone, to the final startup talk of this season. Today, we will have a technical and in-depth discussion on the topic of medical technology with our expert, Shahram Sharif from LindaCare. I would like to thank Joe Lauver of the Alumni Office, of course, for helping us with setting this meeting up. For now, I would like to give the word to our Bootcamp Buffalo, Peter Langela, who will guide the session and moderate the discussion with our startups. That's it for now. Enjoy.
Thank you, Ranj. Welcome, Shahram, and welcome everybody in the audience in this Zoom call. Shahram, the company you founded and you active in is LindaCare, but what I learned on the website is that Linda was a frustrated device nurse. What was her problem?
So yeah, first of all, just before diving into that, I'd like to thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm really excited to be back after 23 years of having graduated from this very university. So it's I have a special feeling and emotion about being here now, coming back after so many years and be able to talk to the fresh new students that may not even have been born by the time I graduated in I graduated in '96. So yeah, it's great really to be on this show. So thank you for having me.
Okay. About Linda, what was Linda's problem?
Yeah, so about Linda. So Linda, that's first of all, it's a true story. Linda is a real person. Linda was still a nurse, cardiology nurse. At the time, at the hospital here in Belgium, where I live now. I live in Brussels since some years. And actually, I can take a step back and tell you the whole story. So LindaCare is basically born out of a hackathon. Okay. And I'm sure most of you know about the hackathon concepts and formats. Yes. And there was this hackathon that was organized by Microsoft Innovation Center. And the format was that they invited a number of so-called challenge owners. So people from the healthcare provider side that had an actual real challenge or problem. They came forward and presented their challenge. On the other side, we had they had selected 5 team captains. I was one of the team captains, and each team captain had to basically take one of these challenges and then go recruit the whole team from the audience of the hackathon. So there were about 60 people attending. And then you have to pitch basically to the audience saying, listen, this is the challenge I'm taking, and I need a developer, I need a designer, I need this and that. Why don't you come and join me? And over the weekend, so we started Friday afternoon, over the weekend, you had to come up with a prototype of a solution to that problem with a whole business plan and financial plan around it. And then you would pitch Sunday night to a jury, including investors, hospital directors, physicians, etc. So this was the context. And I basically very coincidentally, ran into this and became a team captain. So Linda was a nurse during this event that came forward with a challenge that she had. She was trying to remotely monitor cardiac patients with implanted devices, things like pacemakers, defibrillators. And she was having a very hard time because she had reached a number of about 400 or 500 patients. And the tools that she was using were just letting her down because she was just not able to do the work and keep expanding the number of patients. So literally she had 4 different IT tools or software platforms. With each of these software tools, she was able to see part of her patients. So let's say the manufacturer Medtronic had their own tool, manufacturer Boston Scientific had another tool, and then the other one. So she had to log into 4 different portals, and with each portal, she could see some of their patients, all presented in a different way. The data was all over the place. The alerts were all classified different. So it was a mess. So that was her problem that she came forward with. So a real person, a real story, a real world challenge presented by Linda. So that was just the story of Linda.
That's a great story. And I love to hear that this really came from a hackathon. I'm often a coach and a jury member in hackathons. And this is a story I never will forget because That's great.
Yeah, I'm being told by many people who organize hackathons that this is one of the very few real success stories that they have seen, because we went on in the weekend, created a solution, we pitched Sunday, and we were chosen, selected unanimously as a winner. And at that point, nobody ever thought that this could really become something. It was just a fun game over the weekend, unless somebody thought should do something really about it.
Yeah, that's really super cool. Then you won this hackathon and you plan to start a startup. Did you had the plans before to do a startup, or was it really initiated by the hackathon?
So I was an entrepreneur before that. So I had created another venture. I had sold that company. That was, by the way, in telecommunications. It was not in medical field. So I graduated from Twente in electronic engineering with two specializations. Telecommunication and biomedical science. Back then, we didn't have this faculty, which is there now, which is medical technology. But it was kind of you had elective subjects, Keuzefach in that direction. So I had that background. But my career started off in telecom, the first 10 years of my career with large corporations, until I quit and I started my first company back in 2008. So I was an entrepreneur. I grew that company from 0 to about 80 people. Within 4 or 5 years. I sold the company to a French company. I stayed with that company for a few years. And then that was in 2013. I was kind of getting bored having a fancy office and having a VP title and all that. And I thought I want to start another company again. And I wanted to be in medical field. So, and that's all I said to myself. I had no clue where. I had no network, after 10 or 15 years of telecom. So I ran into this hackathon, basically with the thought of, hey, this could be a good entry for me to start building a new network. I had no clue that this could really actually become the next venture. So I had often people say luck. I could say I was lucky, I just ran into this, but many people say luck is a combination of preparedness of mind and an opportunity presenting itself. So that was exactly the case. I was prepared mentally. I had deliberately made the decision that I want to launch a new venture. I had no idea what and where. And then this opportunity presented, and that's it. So that's what happened.
Okay, and now what is the status of Linda? In what areas are you operating, and how many people are working at Linda?
So LindaCare now, so we actually launched in 2015. So I took a year just to do some background research and learn and understand from this space before I really took the decision to launch. So I launched in 2015. So now 5 years on, we are 30 people in total. We went international actually very early on. So the team is now basically spread over 3-4 countries. The main management is here around Brussels. Our software development team is based in Portugal. So we are about 10 people here around Brussels, 10 people in Portugal, and then the 10 other people are in the US. So we launched into US a few years ago. So we have a team in US, and US is really becoming the driving force for our commercial growth. In the meanwhile, after 5 years, we have done 2 fundraisings. So we did a first Series A round of 1.5 million to get started. We did the second round, the Series B of 7 million, where Philips actually joined as an investor. So Philips is one of our shareholder investors. So we have now a very nice mix of a number of venture capitalists in Europe and the US, and Philips as a strategic investor, with whom we are now setting up a global distribution and partnership model.
Wow, that's impressive. Shahram, behind me you see Incubase. Incubase is an environment for startups, and we have also the TechMed Center. So we invited 3 TechMed startups, and I want to ask them to introduce them. That is RB Medical Technology, ARM, and Healers. So what I ask you guys is to do a very short pitch, short as in less than a minute, like 30 seconds. Really, what is your core? And I also know that you prepared some questions for Shahram, so we're going to moderate it. But it's nice that you introduce yourself first. So RB Medical Technology, Jordi, can you give a very short pitch.
Yes, I'll try to make it short. Yeah, so my name is startup focuses on assessing physicians in their diagnosis of patients with some smart solutions. Yeah, that's like the main line of the startup.
Okay, Jordi, RB Medical. We met in the start program, so I'm sure you have some nice questions. But first, I want to go to Christoph. Christoph, what is your short pitch?
Yeah, hi. So hi, Shahram. Nice to meet you. I'm Christoph Jennes, and I'm a doctoral researcher at the Surgical Robotics Lab, which I think by the time you finish at Utrecht still didn't exist. But I'm the inventor of the arm system, and this is basically a system comprising a robot arm that guides an electromagnetic coil that is used to steer magnetic catheters inside of the human body, so during vascular surgeries. And the system is particularly aimed at cardiovascular and endovascular procedures to make these procedures easier on the surgeon and more comfortable for the patient.
Yeah, super cool, Christoph. Thank you. And then I switched to Healers to Jitendra. Are you with us?
Yeah, hi, good evening.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, good evening. Good evening to all. So we are developing basically a web and a mobile-based application so that people can, facilitate home visits for doctors, especially on the weekends or non-office hours on weekdays, because they have only one option, that they have to go to the hospital. So during the pandemic times, they can even call the doctor to their home. So we are planning the application on that basis.
Nice. Where are you at this moment, Jitendra? In Europe or in India?
We'll be launching in Netherlands. Hopefully.
Where are you now?
Right now I'm in India.
In India, I see people are everywhere. Okay, thank you. Shahram, 3 early stage startups, you were there. They have questions for you. Who wants to start? Christoph, do you have a question for Shahram?
Yeah, so basically at this point, we are at a stage where we already have a differentiated product. That's basically my PhD thesis for the past 4 years. So at this point, the prototype is ready, more or less. And I definitely think we have a large market opportunity ahead. And since we start to think about introducing the product to the market, my question is, I mean, I can understand that it's a challenging process. Of course, introducing medtech to the market can probably be, a difficult process. So would you suggest I start investing first in a market development team, in addition to getting a team for further developing the prototype, or should I focus on that after the product is clinic ready, basically?
Yeah, so there are, starting up a medtech, purely medical device company is of course heavier than, let's call them digital health companies. Yeah. Digital health is obviously this category where, it comes very close to medtech, and it's somewhere in between medtech and IT and software, but it's less regulated. And that's where LindaCare is, by the way. And we had the opportunity to position ourselves not as a medical device right from beginning, but more as a software and IT health tech, non-regulated. Yeah. Develop something that can be start to adopt it in the clinical setting, because we didn't position it as a clinical decision-making support system, which is then regulated, but we positioned it as a clinical workflow efficiency tool. And we developed a number of features, intelligent features, we then would make it become a clinical decision support gradually. And that allowed us to already come on the market in a non-regulated way, start getting traction and adoption with the users, and then from there slowly go towards becoming a medical device and getting the certification and all that. So we could commercialize early.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, looking back, I might have done it differently, because there's always an advantage and disadvantage to have how fast you go to commercialization step, because from an investor point of view, the metrics then look very different. So as long as you're still in development phase, you're looking for investments for development, right? So people are not looking at, okay, how many customers do you have, how much revenue have you generated? You're pre-revenue phase.
Yeah.
And you're raising funding for development. But as soon as you go into commercial phase, you start even selling, 1 or 2 commercial contracts, then people switch and they will evaluate you differently. They will evaluate you as a commercial company. And now they want to see you show rapid uptake and commercial growth, right?
Yeah.
So you need to be very careful when you go into business development and sales, and actually don't do it too early.
Okay.
So what I would suggest is you first make sure that you have a number of pilots and reference. Well, there are basically 3 phases, right? There's a co-development phase, so where you work on your prototype potentially together with an institution, research institution, or healthcare provider. I don't know where you're positioning it, but basically your future potential customer base. You find 1 or 2 co-development partners to gain also credibility, ideally some reputable institution. From there, you then go to pilot phase, where you basically put out your MVP or minimum viable product, which should be a bit more advanced than just a prototype, right?
Yeah.
Into a clinical setting, but still non-regulated, right? That gives you a lot of feedback, so you can improve and perfect your product. And then you move into reference customers. So you have a number of customers that you allow to use your product without paying for it, right? So you're not yet commercial, but then you build 1, 2, 3. It depends on where you're positioning your product. Maybe even internationally. 1 customer in a number of countries. And once you have that as a very strong foundation, only then you move into commercialization. And if you also position it this way towards the investors, in all these stages until commercialization, you're looking for development funding, right? Which means that you can also tap into a lot of subsidies, grants, research project funding and all that, and not necessarily VC funding, because as soon as you get into VC, the game changes significantly. And I can tell you a lot of stories about how that looks like, having VCs in your company. Not a bad thing, but it's a completely different dynamic.
Okay, so maybe we come back on that, but I think it's valuable information, Christoph.
Yeah, that definitely. Thanks.
Yeah. Behind me, Shahram, is our cubicles. We are here in the Bastille. When was the last time you were in the Bastille building?
Well, the last time I partied in the Bastille building was probably 95, 96. But the last time I visited, just a few years ago, because my parents still live in Amsterdam, so I come there from time to time, and
nice.
Sometimes I just go and have a walk around the university campus. But yeah, the last real time in the party mode, that was probably 95.
Cool. Now there's not only partying in one of these cubicles. Is RB Medical, and Jordi is there. Jordi, what question do you have for us, Jordi?
Yeah, because you said you have some clinical decision making in the LindaCare, but how did you make patients trust the system?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in our situation, we're not directly addressing the patients. So our customer and user of the system are the cardiologists and the nurse cardiologists, so the Lindas, on a day-to-day basis. So they are using our software platform to monitor the patients. So the patients basically don't notice much, except for the fact that they will get a transmitter box, kind of a router that they put next to their bed. And at night, around 2 or 3 a.m., the box basically wakes up, connects with their wirelessly, obviously, connects with their implanted device, downloads the data, and transmits it to our system. So the only thing that the patient should be aware of is making sure that the transmitter is connected properly and it's functioning. That's all. They don't notice anything else, unless if they have any symptoms, which rarely happens, because these are chronic patients, they are not acute situations, right? They do have a button on the transmitter to press, which will then basically mark the moments where the data is registered. So that the nurse, when she receives that, she receives an alert, which kind of raises that transmission higher than the others because the patient interacted with themselves. So the interaction with the actual patient is limited, and the adoption rates there are, and the trust they have in the system is actually very high. The only issue we have in terms of non-compliance is just because of the patient population's age group is, these are elderly people, often not tech savvy. And even though all they need to do is make sure that that box is plugged into electricity, and that's all they need to take care of, still you see a lot of situations where the device is unplugged, they don't even know, they don't notice. So then it requires more interaction. Somebody have to call the patient and ask them to make sure the device is working. So that's the kind of level of interaction we're having with the patient. Now, having said that, what I didn't mention is, so our first proposition was the software platform, what we call OnePulse, which aggregates data from all the different types of implanted devices into software. And the users are the nurses and cardiologists. In the US, we introduced and we launched a second offering on the market, only for the US market, which is actually a clinical service offering, which means we have our own team of cardiologists and clinicians on our payroll that monitor the patients directly on behalf of hospitals. So that's where we actually do interact directly with the patients. But there we see the same issues. Basically, it's the only non-compliance comes from not being tech savvy enough and disconnected devices and things like that. Other than that, patients are actually very much relieved that they're being monitored. So it really gives them a sense of safety and security, and is a big burden, stress burden off their mind. The adoption of users is something different. In our view, it's not going fast enough for different reasons.
Okay, yeah, I think trust and adoption is especially is very important in medical devices and TechMed scene. So a very relevant question. But from the Bastille, we go to India, to Jitendra. What is your question, Jitendra?
Yeah, I was very interested to know when you changed from the telecommunication to the medtech industry, because medtech has a very high failure rate of startups. So, I wanted to know what risk you were planning to take, and you basically had sold your company and it was a profitable venture, basically the exit strategy for you. But then why did you take a risky step? What was the logic behind that?
That's a very good question. And the answer actually, it's a very personal, there was a very personal drive behind it. There are actually two things. First of all, to be honest, I was just getting bored from telecom. After 10, 15 years of my career, I didn't see enough innovation happening. The excitement was gone. So at the time where I started, there was so much innovation going on. Fiber optics, ATM, there was a lot of innovation in the beginning, but then things started to plateau. So I started to getting bored. That was one thing. The second thing was that just as as a fulfillment on a personal level, as a satisfaction of the result of my work and the impact on a human being, it was just not there. And I was just missing some deeper sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. And in my mind, in the medical field, where you have a direct impact on people's life and well-being, I imagine that that would give me a more deeper level of fulfillment and satisfaction, because if I would be successful there, it would mean that I'm actually having positive impact on people's lives. So that was just a mental, switch that I was making, and indeed I did take a huge risk because I was just shifting away from what my expertise and network and background was to a new industry with no background at all. But then again, I mean, you're all taking big risks and steps. You're all entrepreneurs. One of the key aspects of being an entrepreneur is risk taking and seeing the positive side of things and seeing the potential, and kind of not pay too much attention to the risks. Your glass is always half full, right? And it's just, you go for it.
Nice. Risk taking, but it's not only about risk taking, because if I look on your LinkedIn, Shahram, I see that you did your master in, the previous millennium, but that you also did a master in Utrecht. And this year you went to Vlerick Business School, probably online maybe, and MIT Sloan School. How important is Never Stop Learning for you?
Very important, actually. And indeed, if you look at my LinkedIn, you see that there's a big gap where for years I didn't do anything at all, and then suddenly I actually realized that if I'm not careful, I'll become a dinosaur. So I need to make sure that I just keep feeding myself with new knowledge and be exposed to the latest and the greatest stuff going on. So yeah, I do actually find it very important. And a few years ago, I took that decision to make sure that every couple of years I attend some course or education or of some form or the other. And indeed, the recent activities I've done that you see it's been great, because it just keeps you sharp. It's an intellectual challenge that you give yourself. It also exposes you to other people, so you create additional networks and you learn from that. So yeah, I would definitely, I mean, you guys are all ending your studies or still here in the middle of it, so you have your hands full. But yeah, definitely for your future, keep that in mind. It's good to keep feeding yourself and updating yourself on what's going on.
Yeah, I recognize that part. So who's going to ask the next question? One of the three startups, and also I invite the rest of the audience to put questions in the chat. Christoph, maybe?
Yep, I'm ready. So Shahram, I understand that one of the choices that have to be made is to basically decide who your customers are. If I can tell you about our vision, it's more to have this platform in every operating room that is similar to having an MRI scanner or a CT scanner. So I wanted to find out, how did you decide on your customers? Did you say, okay, we're going to target like major hospital centers that have already adopted something similar to your idea, or did you focus on more cost-conscious hospitals in the local area perhaps, and then expand on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in our situation, the customer segment was actually pretty fine, right? As I explained earlier, it came out of this hackathon, and the nurse, so the nurse Linda was our target user group, target audience already. So that kind of pretty fine. But then you go from, the difference between a user and a customer, right? The user is using your software, or product, not necessarily paying for it. Somebody else is paying for it. So it's either the hospital or someone else. So you need to understand the justifications that your customer needs to for investing in your product. And then you're always looking for early adopters, right? So or even one step before that, the so-called elite adopters. So in the medical field, you have the so-called KOLs, the key opinion leaders. So if you go to conferences and you look, you read papers that are relevant for your space, the names that you see, on those papers and you see presents in the conferences, those are the people that are always looking for the latest and greatest, and they want to position themselves as being the innovative leaders in your industry, right? So that would be the first places to go, because not only they are actively looking for new innovative solutions, and they're happy to work with you.
Yeah.
It also helps them raise their own profile, right, in their own community, showing that they are indeed working with a lot of new innovative solutions. And then vice versa, it will give you the credibility that you need to further develop your venture, also towards investors, but also new customers. Because if you have Professor X, which is a thought leader or a KOL in your industry, and he gets engaged with you, and he's happy to maybe try or test your solution in their hospital setting, and then you can go to the next one and say, well, Professor X is actually deploying our solution. That gives you instant credibility. So that's probably the best place to start. Look for those key opinion leaders that are close to your audience, your target audience.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thanks.
Cool. Who's raising the hand next? Jordi or Jitendra? Jordi.
Yes, I was already raising my hand. I'd like a question here, because of course your startup at first, it was quite small, and now I saw on your website you are in the US, of course. You have quite some how to say it? You have some employees as well. How was the transition from startup to the point where you are now, and then did you have like a key moment as well?
Interesting. The transition from a startup, that's also on my list there, Jordi. Transition from startup to where you are now.
You're welcome.
And I'm also wondered, when is your boring point? You mentioned you were bored from the telecom. What is your future in Linda? But nice question, Jordi.
Yeah, good question. So the transition from startup to scale up. So first of all, it's never a specific moment where you can say, okay, now we are transitioning. It's a whole phase in itself. But it's often transition from startup to scale up is measured by your commercial growth. So you go through the early commercial traction, which is mostly just generating evidence for your solution, for your product market fit. So you need to prove at some point that your customers are willing to pay for your solution. So basically just getting a handful of paying customers. So going from those pilot cases, which is everybody, or not everybody, but a lot of people are happy to use your solution, your product free of charge, which is okay, because you need that to get early, quick engagement and feedback to improve your product. But as soon as you start asking people, okay, so as of now we're going to ask you to pay, then you'll see different reactions, right? So you need to go through that process of generating early adoption and paying customers. And as soon as that comes to a critical mass, where you now have to start really giving service to those customers, maintenance, and then start to also increase your sales, because your investors, which is the story I said earlier, will now start to evaluate your success based on your growth speed, right? So, and that's the phase where you would call yourself scale up. Now you need to start investing in more sales personnel. You need to invest in your sales strategies. You need to figure out whether you're going to predominantly deploy a direct sales strategy with your own sales force, and that's a very expensive model. Or are you going to have partner and distribution sales channels activated? It depends what fits most with your specific type of product or solution. Or are you going to put them next to each other, direct and indirect, which also has its own challenges. You may create so-called channel conflicts. So you may choose some countries to be serviced directly, some other. So these are all the questions that as soon as these kind of questions starts arising, you know that now you're in scale-up mode, right? And you're probably also starting to increase your cost base as you hire more people. So your cash burn goes up. And before you know, you need to go for another raise, fundraising. And then you will be looking at different profile of investors as well. So you go from early stage investors to so-called growth stage investors. So the amounts increase, the complexity increases, but so that's where, and that's where we're basically going through. So it's interesting. It's not an easy phase to go through. I've done it once before in my previous company in telecom. We went, to the first 20, 30, 40 people, and then as soon as you go from 30 to 40, 50, then the game changes considerably, also organization-wise. Now you need to be very intentful with how you shape and structure your organization. You need to introduce management layers and things like that. So that's a big challenge, but it's a good challenge to have. Once you get to that point, they know you've done good so far.
Okay. Earlier in here you said, well, when the VCs come on board, everything changes. What is the biggest change?
So one change is that you are basically not the sole owner of your company anymore, right? So you are a co-owner. Yeah. Now you have new owners that have a significant say in how you run your business, right? So you have to be very deliberate in how you interact with them. You have a formalized board of directors now that comes together every month or every 2 months. You need to prepare those. You need to inform your board about the progress. And that's a whole thing in itself, how you interact properly with your board members, how you report on the progress, both highlights and lowlights, your challenges and your successes, and how you involve them and benefit from their expertise and from their insights, as opposed to just see them as, I have to report to them, keep them happy. And some people do, start doing window dressing, only showing the good stuff and, hide the bad stuff. So that's a whole learning process in itself, how you deal with your investors. And it can take a lot of time and energy. As a CEO, you start getting a lot of, pressure from up and down, where you have to work with your board and your investors, keep them confident, because you know that there's going to be a time where you will need to raise again. And you want to make sure that all your current investors follow you and they keep investing, because that's a show of confidence to your new investors. Because if any of your current investors don't follow, no new investors will invest in you either, right? Because they know that your current investors know everything about you inside out, right? So if they don't follow, then there must be something wrong. So it's both an obligation you have to your current investors, because they gave you money. You have to show them what you're doing with their money, but you also need to keep them engaged and confident about the next steps in the future of your company, while you're actually running the company day to day with the operations, with all the different challenges that comes with running a team, the people management aspect, the sales, the finances. So that's how things changes, because if you were alone and you had all the money you needed, well, you can do whatever you want, do as you think is the right thing to do. Don't bother reporting to anyone else. But so now as a CEO, you have your boss. So the board is actually your boss as a CEO.
Right. Christoph,
that's a very specific dynamic.
Yeah. You raise your hand there, Christoph, your electronic hand.
Yeah. I wanted to know whether these investors that you then approach, if you want to give them, a know-how of your product, or, you expect sustained financing, right? So should you only approach them, regardless of what your financial need is, should you approach them once you only have a final prototype ready? Or can you already, you know, a few stages before that say, okay, this is what I have in mind, and already approach them, you know, beforehand?
Yeah, that's a great question. How to, when, and how to engage with the investors, right? So first of all, you need to differentiate between the different types of investors, right? You have your immediate surrounding, the so-called friends, fools, and families. Now with medtech, I don't think that's even a relevant category, because you probably need larger sums of money for medtech. The next category is the informal investors or business angels. These are individuals, often entrepreneurs themselves, that have done exits and they have capital to invest. And they often come with a lot of knowledge. So this can be smart money, not always, but you can select based on their background and experience and matching your needs. But then you're looking at ranges of, I don't know, 50, maybe 100K per individual. So if you bunch maybe 5, 6 of those investors, you can get up to 200, 300, 400K range, which could be a good seed round funding. So they obviously have a different way of being approached. There are some networks of business angels where you have formalized pitching events, so you can pitch there and you get immediately exposed to the whole group of business angel investors. And then you have obviously the category of venture capital. That's again an entirely different type. These are professional investors. They don't invest their own personal money like business angels do, but they invest the money of the firm, right? And when you get to that point, I would definitely suggest that you read up and you talk to people that have knowledge of how VCs work. Yeah. So make sure you understand how the VC firm itself work, because they raise money themselves from larger investors, right? So if they raise, let's say, a fund of 30 million euros, right? They have 10 years time to invest that 30 million. And actually they take the first 5 years to invest more than half of that in about 10 to 15 companies, right? So you need to understand how that works. So when you engage with them, do your homework, know exactly what is the fund they're investing out of, how much have they invested so far, how many investments are they going to make, what is the so-called ticket size that they will invest, what is the total round there. So this is a whole thing that you need to learn and understand how VCs work. And then the moment, or the right moment to engage with them, I would suggest that you engage informally with them. I call it socializing VCs. So socializing VCs means that you raise visibility and exposure for yourself in a casual, informal way. So you're not asking them for money, but you are presenting your project basically in a casual way. And the best way to do this is to find any matchmaking event that there is out there, and there are many these days, right? Where you can get selected to pitch, right? Because investors attend these meetings to scout and to see what's going on, what's out there, right? Yeah. So at this stage, you could just present your project. You could literally say, we're not raising money right now, but this is what we do, and we're happy to get introduced to anyone who's interested in this. So what you will see is that some investors will approach you just to get to know you, and then they will follow you, right? And they may follow you for 6 months, for 1 year, for 2 years, until you're ready and investable. But in that time period, you engage with them from time to time, give them updates on what's going on. So this is what I call socializing investors. I think that's the best way to go before you actually start hard pitching.
Yeah, it's probably a more safer way.
Yeah, this is probably my takeaway of the Zoom. It's very interesting insight, actually. But also I saw Jitendra raising his real hand. So Jitendra.
I just wanted to know, when you launched the MVP, you taken the feedback from the healthcare providers. So did you talk to some people also who would be using the product? And how much pivoting was required, in just the increasing the compliance for those patients who would be using a product? Did you pivot once or twice? And what was your experience through the journey for making it more, compliant for the patients, or increasing the compliance for them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's actually something that we made a lot of mistakes in. So looking back, the process I just mentioned earlier, where you would go in 3 steps, like co-development partners, then pilot accounts or customers, and then customer references before you really start commercializing. So those 3 steps, if you do that properly, you get a lot of feedbacks where you can tweak and adjust your product as you go on and test it before you really start launching the first version. We actually didn't do that, mostly because of my personal inexperience in this field of medical technology. So my previous company was a software company, and you probably all have heard about the lean startup methodology, right? Just launch whatever basic or minimum viable product you have out there and just iterate as you go, right? Well, I can tell you that miserably fails in this field, and we did. We messed it up basically because we went too fast and we collapsed all those 3 steps into one, right? So we started with a collaboration partnership with UZ Leuven, University Hospital Leuven, which is a very reputable university hospital, extremely high ranking on innovation. So I managed to sign a partnership contract with them. But then I thought, this is it. I mean, Leuven is now our reference customer, right? And I kind of collapsed all those 3 stages into one. And I wanted to go too fast just because I thought it's possible. Little I knew that if you start then calling other potential customers and tell them Leuven is our customer, they will the next day literally pick up the phone, call up the head of cardiology and say, when can we come and watch you use LindaCare's platform? And the cardiologist would say, well, what are you talking about? We're not using their solution. So we made a few mistakes there, and it hurt us in the beginning because it's a small world. And we had to then, do damage control and even do some reputation damage control, because we kind of got a dent into our reputation because we thought we can go that fast, but you can't. You have to really go through those 3 steps distinctly. So and actually know when are we moving from co-development, and don't have one co-development partner, but have multiple. And this is to your question, your user requirements. Unfortunately, at least our experience is that every hospital has a slightly different approach and workflow, clinical workflow, right? So if you build your solution around one clinical workflow and then think that that's it, my product is done, you go to another hospital, they have slightly different clinical workflow and approaches, right? Because none of this is all standardized, because you're touching a space which is all new. So you're essentially creating the market, right? And evangelizing. So yeah, I would definitely suggest you have multiple co-development partners, multiple initial pilot projects, and multiple customer references before you really try to take it mainstream and scale.
Cool. Who's raising the hand for the next question? Or the audience maybe? Or maybe no one. I have a question because I saw again on your LinkedIn, because I sniff always around in LinkedIn profiles. You changed your position from CEO to executive board director. What is the big difference in your job and in your life?
Yeah, so this is a very recent development indeed. So there are a number of developments that happened this year, including Corona, and including the fact that we more and more discovered over the last couple of years that our LindaCare's growth is in the US market, right? And now going through that transition that we talked about earlier, going from startup to scale up, we need to go for another significant fundraising for growth. So that means now we're talking to a different category of venture capital players, which, the minimum amount they invest in you is about 10 million at a minimum. So we look to raise somewhere between 10 and 15 million. And we know that our growth is going to be US, and we are going to look for a lead investor who will be and needs to be in the US. Now, over the past 2 years, to set up everything in the US, I traveled between 15 and 20 times a year back and forth to US, which has been really tiring. Now, if I need to do my next fundraising with a lead investor in the US, they want to see me as a CEO and my management team to be in the US. So that would mean that I either have to move with my family, which was something I was open to, but over the last couple of years, and the current context of the US, for me it was too big of a risk. Plus, we had a great chairman of the board that we brought into the board 3 years ago, someone with an extensive background in medical medtech, 29 years VP of R&D of Medtronic, which is the biggest player out there. So Don was our chairman of the board since 3 years. He's based in the US. He's based in Minneapolis, which is considered the mecca of medtech, right? So there comes a time where, as a founder CEO, you will have to make some decisions and think about what is the best for the company, taking it to the next phase. Now, with all that background and with Corona happening and the whole dynamic, we came to conclusion that the next phase of growth of LindaCare being in the US is best led by someone in the US with a network in the US. And who better than our current chairman who already knows us inside out. So it was not an easy process and conversation to go through with the current investors, but they need to protect their investment. I need to protect the future of my company as a co-owner, as one of the larger shareholders still, and also keep my sanity in all of that. So it's one of those moments as a founder CEO that you have to consider when is the right time to make that move. And this was the right time for me to do a very optimal transition. So basically what it means is that I'm now handing over my job as a day-to-day running of the company as CEO to our chairman. And we don't need to look for somebody coming from outside. So that's the best move you can make. So it's a smooth transition. Don has taken over now, and I'm basically wrapping up that transition phase. And I remain as a major shareholder on the board of directors. But it's not a full-time day-to-day job anymore. So I'm kind of leading from behind, not in the driving seat, but in the, next to the driver or in the back seat. Yeah. So it's a new experience for me as well to see how I can play that role, kind of giving away the baby for somebody else to grow it further, detach myself emotionally because that's not always easy, and then kind of with an arm's length still see how I can contribute to the success and growth of the company in the future. And at the same time, it gives me some space, headspace to take my head out, because for 5-6 years I've been head down, LindaCare only. And now I'm looking outside, and there are lots of interesting opportunities going on in medtech and digital health. So I'm really excited to be in this position now that I can, look around and see what's going on, and help a few other startup scale-ups, and at some point get maybe involved in one or more. So it's a special time for me in that regard.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Very insightful. From the audience, I see also hands raising. Before I go back to Jitendra, I first want to ask Abbas to ask your question.
Okay, thanks, Shahram. I found it very useful, this session. You became the best in a startup presentation for 2 consecutive years, I think 2015 and 2016. I want to know, can you say, what do you think was the main parameter in your presentation to make you the best in a startup presentation?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And so I have done countless number of pitches and presentations. And what I've noticed is that whenever I present something that is really close to my heart and I'm passionate about, first of all, I don't even need slides. I don't need a prepared story. I just tell the story from the heart. And somehow you make a very different connection with the audience when you do that. And the whole LindaCare in that perspective is something that I was really personally passionate about from the beginning. And I told you all the story, how it happened. I had made a deliberate decision that I want to launch a new venture in this space because I want to have direct impact on people's lives. Now with LindaCare, I don't think it can get any closer to having direct impact on people's lives. We have literally saved lives with LindaCare. And especially in the US, where we have our own clinical team doing patient monitoring, we have cases where alerts came through from the patients in a critical mode, and we had to intervene and have them go to the emergency and literally save lives. So if those patients were not on remote monitoring, if we were not monitoring them, they would have been lost. So now imagine you are in this situation. It's your product, it's your company, you are saving lives. So now going back to 6-7 years ago when I had that mental shift that I wanted to have impact on people's life, and now I'm having it firsthand. I mean, the level of passion that ignites in you, that's just palpable. So when I pitch LindaCare, all of that comes through. And I personally believe that is the reason why in those specific competitive pitching events, this is probably what came through, the passion, in the why I've decided to do this, the why LindaCare exists, the why of, and you all probably have heard about Simon Sinek. His book Start with the Why. If you haven't, I really encourage you to go and look it up. Whoever is launching a company among you here, ask yourself why you're actually doing it, and build your story around that why, because then you will also attract people to yourself, whether they are new employees, colleagues, investors, partners, whoever. Talk about your why. Talk about why you're doing this in the first place, and you will see how much what kind of magnetic, attractive field you will create around that, the why of your venture. So I think that's probably one of the main reasons of those awards.
Wow, yeah, thank you for the question, Abbas, and the very insightful information that you share. I like really that point of passion and why in the pitch that we miss sometimes. So very good. Jitendra, I promise to come back to you.
Yeah, so I just want to know whether the company will be focusing only on this product, or you tend to diversify in the future, or you will make a new company for a new product?
Yeah, that's another great question. So we started LindaCare, as I mentioned, from a specific perspective on one specific problem, right? But then when I stepped back and when I took that 1 year next to my job, so I still were in my earnout period from my previous exit, I used that year to do a lot of research around this topic, and I wanted to have a broader vision, not just okay, we're going to monitor cardiac patients. So when I started building a vision and strategy for the company, I created this broad vision of seeing two major trends, major global trends. One is chronic diseases in general, right? Today, 1 out of 3 people globally have a chronic disease. And you have chronic cardiovascular diseases, you have diabetes, you have COPD, you have a bunch of different chronic diseases, and you even have, unfortunately, patients with comorbidities who have more than one chronic disease. So that's one global trend, unfortunately, which is just increasing. On the other side, you have remote patient monitoring. telemonitoring, telehealth, whatever you want to call it, which has for a long time technologically been there, but never found real takeoff in adoption, right? But I could see that this is, increasing as a trend. And I thought, well, there's an intersection of where these two come together. So that's what I want to do. So I want to build a company that creates remote patient monitoring technology, or actually maybe not even reinventing the wheel, but find a way to enable large-scale adoption of remote patient monitoring in chronic care, through which you can, give better care at lower cost and take away a major burden from the stress of the patients being monitored. So that was a broad, and then I developed this roadmap where we said, okay, that's our, vision for the long term, right? And it's a pretty ambitious vision to address, the different chronic spaces. But then we start with the first focus, which happens to be this cardiac, disease domain. And then from there, we start basically extending the solution to the other chronic disease areas. So that's the long-term vision, and it's still the vision of LindaCare, which is being told. But now 5 years on, we still have our hand full on that very first chronic disease, and within that space, even a very niche space of implantable devices. To give you an idea, globally there are 10 million patients with an implanted cardiac device, 10 million. And there are only about 2.5 million of them being monitored today. So we're still nowhere near that large-scale adoption. So we still have a long way to go to really claim that we have enabled large-scale adoption. So whether we remain our focus on this, or we start at some point developing other solutions for other, it's also a matter of indeed the investment needed for that, which is not an easy task, because when you attract investors with a focus on developing one area, the moment where you can say, okay, we want to start investing now in a second area, it's not always obvious, right? They're not going to tell you, okay, sure, here's a couple more million, go and start playing around, because that in itself is again a different phase of growth. Now that you've achieved a growth phase on this one, you want to go back to experimentation in another field, which is taking another pack of money, which is not necessarily the focus of the investor you're having on board, because now you have growth investors and you're starting to look for early stage investment, and they're not going to give you the money because they want to keep growing this field. So then it's a matter of, okay, do we spin it off to something else? So we're not there yet, but these are something that you will hopefully encounter down the line.
Oh, yes. All very nice question. We're in the flow. It's the longest startup talk ever already, but we take another two questions. And Rens has a question about competition, because we didn't address that yet. Rens.
Yeah, hi, Shahram. So when we spoke on the phone before this talk, we also mentioned the topic of competition in the medical industry. You have giants like Medtronic, which was already mentioned, Philips, many more. How do you navigate that field as a startup? Do you want to be known publicly, or do you go under the radar? What is the best threat?
Yeah, that's another great question. And there are multiple aspects to the question. So it is indeed getting a very crowded market, especially the digital health, because the barriers of entry are lower compared to hardcore medtech, right? But even medtech as a space is also getting more and more crowded, because in general, the barriers of entry and starting up companies are lowering because of these kind of programs that you guys are also providing, incubation, acceleration programs, the growing VC money that is being attracted to this space now, especially because of COVID. We are seeing record investments from VC community pouring into everything remote care and digital health. So yes, it's becoming more and more crowded. So you need to be very careful when you launch a concept to look for how much overlap you're having with other existing players. And it's not always crystal clear whether it could be an overlap with another player or a potential collaboration partnership, right? So it's really a minefield, and there is no clear answer to it except that you need to do your homework well. You need to really do a good market scan and research before you launch anything, because you don't want to be naive and not have looked well and start something and invest, and at some point come across, oh wow, we're overlapping with 5 other players that have done something similar, and now investors are becoming more stringent, and now they're saying, well, there are 5 other players, why should we keep funding you, because your success chances are not clear. So do a lot of research in the beginning before you you venture into any direction. So that's one thing. The other thing, specifically, you're mentioning large companies, like large corporations like Medtronic, Philips, etc. I call it dancing with the bear. So it's a very interesting interaction that you can create, because these could be your great partners, right? But you're like, dancing with a big bear that, if they step on your foot, they crush you. So it's a very delicate dance to see how you position yourself to become interesting and attracted by these companies. But it shouldn't be something that they could just, come close and, play around with you and partner with you and then take off, and they could do maybe the same thing in no time. They just put, a bunch of engineers on something if they want, and they make it happen. So be very careful, but don't hide yourself away from them, because they'll find you anyway, right? So get exposed at the right time, not too soon, but already have something tangible. But it's a continuous maneuvering and making sure you position yourself somewhere where there's not too much overlap. A bit of an overlap is okay, because they recognize what you're trying to do. And if you can show that you're actually having a different approach or a more innovative approach, they'll be interested to engage with you. So in our case, it took me a year discussing with these large giants before even I launched LindaCare, because I knew that if any of them would not be happy with what we do, they would block us easily. So and the initial responses were actually not positive at all. Literally the very first VP of one of these large companies that I spoke to, when I explained this is what I'm considering to do and launch this kind of a solution, he literally looked at me and said, we would never give you data from our devices. Why would we? So I was shocked, obviously, and I was immediately kind of demotivated, saying, "Oh, that was a stupid thought of me. Of course, they will never going to play a game." But so you just keep talking. I talked to the other ones, and it took me really almost a whole year, and that was for me a condition to see whether these guys are ready to play or not. And until I was able to convince them all to collaborate and position myself in a way that it's not competitive to them, but complementary. And it's something that they cannot do themselves. Even though they have the power to do it, they cannot build we position ourselves as a vendor agnostic player. So we would need to collaborate with all of them. They would all need to collaborate with us. And what we do, I used an expression saying what we do is rising the tide, which lifts all boats. So this is going to be good for everyone, for the whole industry, for all of you. It's not going to give advantage to one or the other, but it's going to be good for everyone. So, I mean, this is our story, but you will need to find your own, spot in a crowded market. But if you find a good spot with a bit of an overlap, but not too much, and find collaborations, then you'll be fine. But yeah, it's getting crowded.
Nice insight. Dancing with the bear is, I remember that part. Okay, one of the final questions, maybe from one of the 3 startups, from Jordi or Christoph or Jitendra, or anyone else? Do I see hands? Oh, well, okay, then we close the session. I think it was one of the most insightful sessions. I made some notes, and I certainly will remember this and use them in my future workshops. So thank you for that. And Rens, I give you the microphone for the final words. Bye, Shahram.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks everyone for your attention. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Shahram. I think we can all conclude that this talk was really insightful. I was very happy to be present here, and I'm guessing the startups were as well. I still would like to thank, of course, Joe Laufer of the Alumni Office for helping us setting this up. Peter, you, of course, very much thank you for hosting this. And Shahram, yet again, thank you very much for your time and your effort. For all our participants today, we hope to see you again in the next year. Take care, stay safe, and enjoy the coming days. And thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.